So I know some of your names and faces are familiar, but I'm Caz, and I am the director here at The Simple Way, and have lived in the neighborhood about 13 years, and well, I guess coming up 14 years, and so in between those years I lived in Atlanta, but I've been the director here for 8 years. And
I am Michael Pearson. I met Caz when she moved to Atlanta for a period of time, and we got married, and obviously we moved here to Philadelphia. And currently, so I've lived in the neighborhood for, I guess, 9 years now. And then I work at a local nonprofit in Philadelphia called Benefits Data Trust as a contact center operations manager.
Great. So we decided to start having these monthly conversations because I get a ton of emails from people who are connected to us here at The Simple Way with questions about who we are and how we operate and what we value. And so I like to have conversation and like talk about things more than I really enjoy like writing an email. So this was the easiest way to like do a catchment of people. The themes that I chose for the next year are things that I've really been learning about as I've led the work here and lived and worked in urban ministry really for the last 18 years. And so we don't come as experts more than we come as continuing learners in this work. And I sort of roped Mike into this conversation. So we are going to share a little bit about our own personal journeys into understanding how to create boundaries for ourselves as we live and work in urban contexts. And then we'll share a little bit about how we've learned to do that together. So I moved to the United States from New Zealand in 2004 to participate in a one-year volunteer service program called Mission Year. And Mission Year brought young people to the city to live and serve for a year. So I thought I was coming into this for a one-year deal. And 18 years later, I'm still trying to work out the same stuff. But I'm really grateful for all of those years and all that I have learned and who I've become in that process. I met and got connected to The Simple way back then in 2005, actually, and have had a relationship with people who have participated in the community for almost that whole time, but did not move in until 2008 myself. So I guess that's 14 years ago. And I initially moved into the community, not into the intentional community, because they had sort of some parameters around who got to be in the intentional community, and you weren't allowed to be working full time as according to sort of their covenant together. So I was really committed to my job and really loved it. And so just moved in sort of adjacent to The Simple Way. And then slowly over time became sort of the carer of the community or support to the community itself, the intentional community. And then actually participated in helping the community, the intentional community end and disband. And then transitioned us into who we are today. So my work over the last 8 years as the director of The Simple Way has been sort of moving us from who we were and who we've been to who we are today, and maybe who we're going to be. And that's been a lot of hard work. And some of what I've learned and some of what's needed to happen is to understand that our identity as individuals and as neighbors is different than the organization itself. And so it's been really important work for us to understand sort of what it means to create sort of containers and create identity, and then how that actually helps us sustain the work that we feel really called to. So I'm not sure how familiar you are with the work of The Simple Way, but in the early days, it was a group of friends that lived together, created an intentional community. And I really, as far as I understand it, I wasn't a part of the original 6 who started the work here, but as far as I understand it, it was like we're all in with every part of who we are, and every part of the neighborhood was also a part of you know, invited into the house, and there was very little boundary creating, I think. And I think when you're 22 and you're graduating college, there's you have a lot more energy or a lot more ability, and sort of probably care less about what some of the cross boundaries might mean for you. And there was a lot of really exciting things that happened at The Simple Way during that time. But I think as we have grown and as we gained more recognition through the story that was told, through the book that was written, through, you know, individuals and founders like Shane who've gone on to sort of create their own platform, the idea of who we are as an organization or even as a community sort of grew larger than life almost, and larger than any of us as individuals. And so those of us that came along and joined in the community and joined in the work of The Simple Way in later years, then sort of have been carrying around this larger than life idea. And you know, that gets really difficult to carry in this question of, am I carrying on this particular work that somebody else has done? Am I doing the same thing that other people have done because they really cared about it? Or is this something that I care about? Or am I doing this because I think other people think I should be doing it? So there's just a whole slew of questions that I think I have heard other people who have been part of The Simple Way ask, and that I've asked myself. And, you know, to be really transparent and really honest, sometimes at the end of those questions, there's either more questions or real disillusionment. You know, disillusionment about what you think should have happened through your work and your efforts. And I mean, burnout, like literal burnout in people's minds and bodies. We've experienced sort of lack of finances and, you know, sort of a failing infrastructure. You know, we at one point in about 2013, 2014, we had The Simple Way had grown so much externally, like doing work outside of the neighborhood. So we had 17 different ministries, sort of all under the umbrella of The Simple Way. Things like the New Sanctuary Movement, supporting immigrants in Philadelphia was housed under us. We had a flag football league that was housed under us. We had an organization that took trips to El Salvador, housed under us. We were publishing a magazine for communities. We had all of this really, really amazing good work. But we got to the end of the year that year and realized we didn't have the finances to host our annual Christmas toy store. And it was kind of this moment in this crisis. We were like, how can we be doing putting all of our energy into all of this really good work, and then discover that the thing, kind of the DNA of who we are in the neighborhood, that we're not able to do that. And that was one of those moments. I'm sure you've all had them in your life, but it was one of those moments where it was a crisis moment. There was tense relationships within the community. There was this disappointment from one group of staff people who wanted to pursue sort of everything outside of the neighborhood and all of this really large platform work, to a group of people who are like, I'm just committed to this block. And at the end of the day, like, no one was wrong. Like, all of that work is really meaningful, but we hadn't paid attention to like what our identity is. We just keep saying yes. I think the next 8 or 9 years, it's been since then, we've learned to say no a lot more to what's not ours to do, and then we've learned to say yes, but this is what we can offer, or how can we support you, versus how can we do this ourselves. And so you know, a lot of my understanding of boundaries for myself and for the organization as I lead it has been around like knowing who we are and what's ours to do. And often for a small grassroots organization like ours, it's really just what's right in front of us. And then outside of that, being a really good partner and supporting other people. So of those ministries that I told you about that were housed under us, we tried to support them all sort of grow their own, get wings, so to speak, and become their own thing. And all of them went on to be their own nonprofit or LLCs, except for one which ended. And you know, I think we can be proud of like letting something go. And what we did was get back to who we felt like we should be ourselves. And so I think part of that for me as I've led that work is that I've had to learn to not be responsible for other people's emotions, and not be responsible for what's not mine to take on. And I think that's really, really difficult, especially in my opinion, especially in Christianity or in Christian circles or in nonprofit work, like to not take responsibility for a problem, or to not put your hand up to fix something, can often be seen like you're somehow abandoning your faith or somehow abandoning the cause. But I think what I've learned is that I need to trust that God's already at work, and if it's something that can flourish, that there's likely someone else that can do it, even if I can't, and that honoring what ours is to do actually frees up resources and people in other ways. And what I've found is that, you know, the thing that's really changed for us at the Simple Way is that our like food distribution has just like expanded and like sort of flourished in a way that we just hadn't anticipated. And it's opened all of these avenues for us and for meaningful relationships, and to like really be committed to the people that we live around and to be really good neighbors. And I think in letting go of some other things, it's just opened this opportunity and made us available in a way that our neighbors actually needed, versus in the ways that we had decided they needed. And so, yeah, I think I love who we are now and who we've become. And I'm really aware that there's handfuls of people that are disappointed that we aren't all of the other things. And that there's a handful of people that would love us to say yes to a bunch more things. I think one last thing that I'll say about this is, as we created, as we understood who we were, we stopped being responsible for everyone that wanted to come here to visit and to sort of, I don't know what's the word, like to see this to see this thing that wasn't real necessarily. And so we really reduced the amount of people that were coming to volunteer. We reduced the amount of people that we were hosting and visiting. And in doing that, it helped open up all of these opportunities for people from our neighborhood who were actually coming to us for food already. We just began to ask them to volunteer. And then we began to say, well, really, we want to pay people because employment is really what's going to change things. And so, you know, we really have shifted from an intentional community of people that were relocators to Kensington to being a group of people who are, you know, truly a mix of relocators and residents, long-term Indigenous neighbors, you know, doing this work together. And it totally changes sort of the rhythms of our work and who we've become. But I think, you know, the idea of like those were boundaries, I think it was less about keeping people out, but just creating sort of fences and gates, I like to call it. Like we can open to this, we can open ourselves to this, and we can invite you into this, and then this is a thing we're going to say no. Like for us to be true to who we are, we actually need to invite a neighbor to come and do this with us. So yeah, that's what I've been learning. We're going to open up for some questions afterwards, but I wanted you guys to hear Mike's experience and his work in an urban setting too.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to echo what Caz has said. I think the work that the Simple Way has done to kind of focus on becoming more of the community, becoming more a part of the community, has been really important. And Caz asked me to talk a little bit about my experience with boundaries. And I think when I lived in Atlanta, I was in Atlanta for about 12 years. I did a lot of work in youth ministry. And to support that work in youth ministry, I worked in coffee shops. And I found that I really loved working in coffee shops. I loved the experience. I loved creating the drinks. And it really became an important part of who I was. And a friend of mine came to me and said, hey, I think we should open a coffee shop in our neighborhood. And that idea really resonated with me because it helped bring two things I really love together: creating coffee shop, but also creating a job program to help kids learn how to make coffee, which is a really good transferable skill. So we agreed to do that together. And it was one of those things where I was in my 20s. It was my first time doing something like that. And I really threw everything I had into it. And I didn't set any boundaries. I didn't set personal boundaries. I didn't set financial boundaries. Like I didn't, and I literally spent a year and a half to 2 years just throwing everything that I had into this. I didn't lean into the people around me in the ways that I should. And it became something that like I began to internalize. The success or failures of the shop, like on a daily basis, like influenced how I felt on a daily basis. If we had 10 people come in that day, like I would go home and I would feel happy and I would feel excited. And if we had 2 people come in, like I would go home and I would be crushed. And like that, like I just internalized that. And what that created was that shop continues, and that work continued, and we went through some ups and some downs, but because of the fact that I didn't set boundaries, what that meant was after 2 years I had to meet with the person who was my co-director at the time and say, hey, like I really believe in this work, and I believe that this is a really good thing, and I think it's a powerful thing, and I think it's important, and I think it's going to be successful. And I think for all of that to happen, I have to leave, because like I don't have the capacity, I don't have the ability, because like I didn't set those boundaries at the beginning, and now I just have nothing left to give. And so what that necessitated was me leaving something that I loved, to see it continue to thrive. And I can say with like all joy, like it has continued to thrive. Like that seed that me and my friend planted, still thrives today in Atlanta. It's a coffee shop called Community Grounds. And I'm very excited that it's still there. And I'm excited that I got to plant that seed. But like the flower that bloomed from that is something that I wasn't a part of allowing to grow. Like I got to see the seedling, and then I had to walk away. And I believe that if I had set better boundaries, if I had leaned more into the people around me, if I had thought that through in a deeper way and said, hey, like this is important, but like so are the rest of the aspects of my life, as opposed to letting every aspect of myself get caught up in this experience, I think I would have been able to stay and be a part of that success. I like to always kind of balance it with my current experience and the job that I have now. I've actually been in the middle of probably the second biggest project I've ever done outside of starting this coffee shop. But because like I've been really intentional about setting those boundaries as I've done it within the organization, like I have been able to see that through to the end. I have been able to see that through to success. And I think it's really important. I think it's important to understand like it requires dedication and it requires effort. But it also requires taking space and saying like, this is what I can give and this is what I can do. And this is what I need to do to make sure that I'm taking care of myself and keeping myself in a place that allows me to really see this through to success. So yeah, I think that was a really formative experience for me. And again, I wouldn't change anything, because I really did like, I love the fact that it's still there. I do regret not setting those boundaries, because I think, like I said, that's the reason that I had to step away. So that's kind of the Cliff Notes version.
So one of the things that we have learned together, I think, as we explore, as we've like continue to live alongside what used to be an intentional community, is asking these questions like, how do we continue to create community when what we've experienced sort of didn't work or failed or whatever the answer is. And I think we've done a lot of work, as a couple, and as an organization, to understand, first of all, what are our values? So, for the simple way, we went from this huge multiple page document covenant that we used to have to just say, okay, let's get 5 values. And then when someone asks us to do something, let's ask the question, how does it relate to these things that we value? And do we have the capacity to do this work? And then who are our partners? And I think even as a family in the neighborhood, we ask those same questions, like, what are our values? Like, what's our capacity? And then who's going to support us to do this? And I think learning and understanding that, like, for me, I think the call for all of us, all humans, is to like live in these ways that we're relying on each other, in that even when we have a position with power or privilege, or we have some kind of privilege, that to shift the balance of power, there has to be something that you're asking the other person for, and that reciprocal relationship and mutuality is part of the work as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think to that point, I think it's really important that to be able to set boundaries necessitates leaning into partnerships. Because the reality is, like, we can all move farther, faster together than on our own. And the work that you may find that you love, the more that you do that with others, the more successful and the longer you're going to be able to do it. Whereas the more you're doing it on your own and you're not setting those boundaries, like, the less success you're going to find.
So one of the things we did was we asked everyone that had been living all together in the same house. We just said, hey, if you're really committed to the neighborhood, then like find a house or rent a house, buy a house if you have the ability to do that, and then come back and keep showing up. And in doing that, what we invited everyone to do was create these new boundaries between sort of what people's expectations are and their own lives. And so, we live right across the road. We're in the Simple Way building, which is, we call it our office or our hub. And our house is literally across the street. So I have like a 30-second commute to work.
Which does necessitate strongly encouraging and setting boundaries. Right. As you can imagine, I mean, a lot of us are working from home at this point, but prior to that, having your office directly next door probably leads to not setting the best boundaries if you're not careful.
But one of the things that we did was the neighbors in the neighborhood knew that this was a place that they can come, and people would respond and support them and help them. But with creating a space that's separate to our living, it gave me anyway, I can only speak for myself, the freedom to say yes or no in a different way. When I'm at the office and someone knocks on the door, which happens really frequently, it's part of my job to respond and to support. But if someone knocks on my door at home, then I feel like I can make a difference. I can say, oh, actually, I'm bathing my kids, or I can't help, or I can say, yes, I can. I have the capacity to support. And so some of those little changes for us at the Simple Way has given each person that is part of the community here the freedom to pursue things that they care about, as well as pursue life together in the with the Simple Way, but also like create sort of relationships and connection to neighbors outside of being identified with the Simple Way. And I think it's it's just enriched all of us in a way that I don't think any of us realized it would. And, you know, there's certainly a loss to like who we knew ourselves to be. But the opportunity and what's gained is something really different. Then I think the last thing I'll say in terms of life for us as a family is also recognizing that what we ask, what we're inviting our kids and asking our kids to do is something that we really have to think through, and creating a life for them is about creating a boundaries and connections with other people as well, what we say yes to and what we say no to. And I think that's been some of my biggest learning, is like how to invite the kids to learn why we're saying yes to this and why we're saying no to this. And the biggest thing for us currently is we have a lot of people who at different points around the neighborhood asking for money or asking for food or asking for something, and like deciding together, this is our commitment as a family. We're not going to give money, but this is what we can do, and helping to learn and help our kids learn that that's okay to say no, even when someone is like asking for something or they need something. And this is why we feel like we are saying no, because there's all of these other opportunities that we know about. And so a lot of it is resourcing ourselves with the knowledge of what else is available, not in a palming it off to other people, but being able to say, I'm not able to give you this, but I do think that there's these other opportunities. So we know of the other 17 places around the neighborhood that they can get a hot meal or they can get assistance, you know, and just being a really good resource offers a lot of boundaries, because you can communicate, like these are the ways that you can find the support you need. I don't necessarily have to be the place that you find that. And yeah, I think it's challenging on a daily basis to, and I feel myself leaning towards guilt or shame as I've like tried to say, like, how am I going to live the next 15 years out in this like, you know, our neighborhood's in a really devastating place right now because of the opioid crisis and gun violence that has really increased. And so part of this conversation that we're having with you is the conversation that we have with each other on a constant basis of like, I'm committed to this, but I don't know that we can survive it. So what do we do to be able to sustain our well-being and our family and in our community? So yeah. Great. Do you have anything else you want to say? Great. Well, if you have a question, you can raise your hand, and Jen, who is under the Simple Way, will unmute you and you can ask us, or you can write it in the chat. We have about 5 or 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you, both of you, for sharing your struggles that you've had with intentional community. I've been affiliated with the Community of Celebration in Aliquippa, Pennsylvania. And let me just share with you a few things that I think why you're on the right track. I've been, you know, the ups and downs of that community I've been involved in, but I haven't lived with the community, but I have been part of it. They just recently signed a memorandum of agreement with a Christian Alliance group called the Greenhouse. Are you familiar? I don't know whether you're familiar with them or not.
No, I haven't.
Because there are only a few members left. And what I have observed in the last few, maybe 10 years, is that they've become ingrown.
Mhm.
And they have a regular, it's an intentional community,
Mhm.
but they have lost the purpose of what they started to do.
Right.
Okay. And so there've been a lot of kind of infighting going on, and they're elderly. So now this new group is coming in to kind of take over, but they're living there. I mean, it's row houses, so they're right. It's similar to what you're doing.
Mhm.
And I've been curious over the years, and I have a background in family issues and mental health. And I've been curious over the years, just what is it that an intentional community that can last?
Yeah.
Because Ambridge had an intentional community, the first one that eventually, just ended. And so I think, and I like the idea that you've set your boundaries with your family, and you're going to say no to things, and you're going to have your own life.
Mhm.
It's very hard to do that when you're living right there on top of it.
Mhm.
And I've stayed out purposely just to
Mhm.
be present but not there.
Right.
And they had a group called the Companions, which I was for a year, which was a group that they formed to be supportive of the intentional community, like a monastic community.
Right.
And what happened with the Companions is that they serve no purpose. So the Companions aren't active anymore. They
Mm.
didn't use the Companions to say, well, we're struggling with this, can you help with this?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's been my experience. So that's why I'm really want to support you in trying to, and I've been a follower of Shane for many, many years. So, and Shane is kind of doing his own thing, started Red Letter Christians and so forth. So when you've got kind of a celebrity like that in your midst, who's kind of off doing their own thing, and you're trying to maintain the original purpose, it's
Right.
really hard. I mean, all I can say is
Yeah.
I can, just support you in trying to maintain that, because it's not easy. And
Yeah, you're right.
you're called, and I went to seminary where they said, unless you're giving yourself 100% to the Lord, you're not really a Christian. So I can just share that with you.
Yeah.
And,
Thank you, Terry.
okay.
Yeah. I do think that your question over what helps a community stay is really, really interesting. And I think I'll just say a couple of things and then I'll get to your question. I think that there are a bunch of communities. If you're interested in that, there's a network called Nurturing Communities Network, and there's a whole slew of communities around the country. And there's communities like in Chicago called Reba Place that are intergenerational and have been around for a really long time. Some of the work is a little bit different, but I think what you're saying in terms of companioning, I think what we in the early days of the community didn't do well was that we didn't care for the souls of the people that were like, that there wasn't sort of pastoral care in a way or spiritual direction. And so when you're in the midst of like working in like really hard places amongst marginalized people who are suffering, I think, we give ourselves, but we're not staying rooted and grounded. And so I think the other thing, like we are currently the only, like the Simple Way hasn't had a lot of older people. Like Shane's 47 at this point. I'm 45, and we're like the oldest people that are around the Simple Way. And like you, Terry, and Denise and other people, like, I think we need wisdom and input from people that have gone on, you know, and had experiences. And so, like, you know, 15 years ago, everyone was only in their 20s. And like, when I look back to when we were doing that, I'm like, what were we thinking? Like, where were our elders, you know? And so I think I've really learned that, and now we're at this point, we're like, well, we actually need a mix of younger people and, you know, us, because, you know, now my time is spread with the kids and like work and like the community, is that you need sort of that intergenerational experience, life together. And, you know, I think we're so segregated racially, but also like, I think all of that we separate demographically. You know, we need people like Mike works at a different organization, working with people with benefits, and it's been incredibly helpful to have someone live next to the Simple Way that's doing different work that we then have this connection to. But in the early days, we all just lived here and we all just did this, and we didn't have this extended network. And so I think anytime we can give each other the freedom, which doesn't sound like boundaries, but it is, the freedom to go and do the things that make them come alive. So Emily and Julie, go for it.
Hi, good morning. Yeah, thank you so much for both of you for sharing. Can relate a lot to the things that you're talking about. I've been here in this urban context for almost 12 years now, and live in intentional community, but started a separate organization where we are serving in the neighborhood, in the organization. But one of the questions, and we were formed, I don't know if you guys might be familiar with, where we were kind of birthed out of the underground network that's here in Tampa.
Okay.
But a question that I would just interested to hear more of the story of when you said the intentional community disbanded. Because actually one of the families that live with us, they just went under contract with a house, and they're going to be moving like 10 minutes away, not in the same neighborhood. And I'm, you know, just curious how that worked as people, as you went through that process. Did people stay in the neighborhood? Did people drive back in? Did people stay connected? Because you know, it's definitely a hard transition to go through, and just, you know, wondering kind of what your experience was in that.
Yeah. I mean, I think we experience, so, I mean, at the same time as the community disbanded, it was like at that crisis point where we realized, oh, we have all these ministries, but not the infrastructure for them. And so like people lost their jobs. And so their job was tied to their housing. So they were living in an intentional community, but it was kind of tied to their job. So were they really living in an intentional community, or were they just getting free housing? Anyway, I don't want to get into that, but
no, but I get what you're saying. Yeah.
So some people left willingly, and you know, they were happy to move on. There were 2 or 3 others that just moved on into different houses on the block, you know, like, and so for the first few years after we sort of ended the like one house, like what we say we have now is like a village. So there's 2 of it, like we live right next door to Katie and Shane Claiborne. Like we bought the house right next to theirs, and so we don't have like, and then there's another guy that lives on a block away, and then we had a couple other people live a few blocks away. And then, you know, for us, we probably have, you know, 4 or 5 people who are individuals and then a couple of families who are living within like maybe 4 or 5 blocks. And I
Gotcha.
would say that some of our rhythms of life definitely, we tried some of like weekly meals, we tried daily prayer, like continuing some of those rhythms. And to be really honest, it felt really difficult, like to continue to try to do the same rhythms with this different living arrangement. And so over the last 8 years, we've really tried to pay attention to what is it that people can do. So this is we can do this together, and we really love doing it together. And is it okay if just these 2 families, they meet together? Like for us and some friends of ours who live a few blocks from us, they have kids that are the same age. We have dinner with them once a week. We do church. We've been doing church online with them during the pandemic. Like we do childcare swap. So we're much closer to like this one family in the community than we are with like everybody. But then like someone else I'll go for a walk with once a week, or you know, Katie and Shane we see just about every day in the backyard, and we make connections, and sometimes we eat together. You know, generally if we're part of the Simple Way, we connect over the sort of the work, like the garden work. We have some shared commitments, but the freedom to sort of come and go but there's been a lot of painful loss in some of the relationships, you know. And I think
I've seen that too.
Yeah,
I've
that's
seen that
part
too,
of it.
celebration, right?
I do have friends that live in a community that sounds similar to you, where they live together in one big house, and then families started buying houses a little bit separate, and they've stayed committed to weekly meals together, and like keeping some rhythm where you're in each other's lives. Because I think what happens is that's been important for us here too, is like, how do we stay in each other's lives? Because just 3 blocks away can feel like a different
in my study of communities, intentional communities, that go back to the first intentional community in the early church, you know, that community did not last. And as I've observed, it's just like, you know, like we're humans, and we have, and particularly those of us who live in America, we have all of those cultural things that impact, right, on what we try to do. I think it's very important what you're doing. And as I've been watching you grow over the years, it's important, but it's important that you keep your own identities, that you keep your own family life, because I've seen families split apart. Thinking of the son of, I mean, I've had, you know, there's been all kinds of things that have happened over the years of celebration, and they're just they've survived, but they've survived with just a remnant of the original one. And they started out with a big house too. So, what is it that we can do as an intent? What is it that you can do as an intentional community? And I've also started a number of ministries myself, and giving that up and turning it over to somebody younger is really important. So, I mean, I think if you keep in mind that you're not the ministry, you're just the vehicle that God has sent to try to get people back to the way it was originally. I mean, I don't have any answers except that it's a struggle and it's hard. It's not easy.
Yeah. Another question I had, Caz, was you've mentioned how in the early days that you guys, looking back, that that you kind of failed as far as caring for the souls of people. And it seems like that is, a common theme for people that are, have these hearts, have this motivation, or just like, we're going to do what we're called to, and we forget about each other, sometimes the other people that are called to the work or whatever. But have you guys kind of figured anything out in that, like a good,
Yeah, I mean, I think something that we have encouraged, I mean, it's a little bit different with the organization versus the community. I think
Mhm.
like in our work as the organization, like we have to do stuff. I do a whole lot of stuff around trauma, like trauma informed like service, because so many of the people that are working with us experience trauma or have in their lives. And so
Yeah.
like creating, like we just took the month of July off, even though we know our neighbors still need food. Like we need to care for ourselves. Like we need to give ourselves the space. So it's like finding the ways that will give energy. So like us working through the heat of July is like on top of the intensity in our neighborhood during the summer, on top of like our trauma, like I'm like, we're just not doing it. We're just going to take it off. We're going to close the office, and then we can all come back, and we all so we've been caring for ourselves. So that's one thing. I think the other thing is that making available. So what we do is I make available opportunity for either spiritual direction, counseling, or coaching. And so we, for the organization and the people that work for the Simple Way, we make like a certain amount of our budget we put towards that, which is really hard to do when you run on a shoestring, but is essential to make it available to people. And then I think other things like I do regular, like encouraging people to like be part of a small group that isn't necessarily connected to the community. And the other little things like having a group, like we do group spiritual direction, which is
work?
like,
Does that work?
I have a
Group spiritual
suggestion.
direction?
yeah, it's a process that I've learned, but it's a process where you just listen. It's just a listening space. You're not fixing, saving, advising, or telling people what to do. You're just giving people the chance to or creating a talking circle where everyone can just say what it is that they're carrying. And you do some kind of ritual around it. So just creating, what I found is that you're actually just creating space where people can either express themselves through like art or creation or rest, or and you're not doing a whole lot of like teaching and like informing people what they can be doing. And I think our community in the early days, you know, everyone was probably connected to a church of some sort, or and then as we had more and more people come, they came from outside of Philadelphia, they moved into the neighborhood, they had no connection, and so they relied on this internal connection. And that's where I'm like, no, everybody needs something outside of this thing that's feeding them. So like the community can't be your only thing that's spiritually feeding you or relationally feeding you. It just, like Terry said, it just becomes this thing that almost implodes because you're not, you're so inward focused. And that's what I found. When I came on in community care at the Simple Way, we probably had 6 or 7 like 20-somethings that were severely depressed because they just had nothing outside themselves and outside of the Simple Way that was like that they were motivated for.
But don't you think you're going to find that? I mean, in terms of, let me give you a little hope. We live in a culture and a society where I think what we're doing is important, because we are attracting, at least that's what I found with celebration, attracting people who are hurting,
Yeah,
attracting people who are through trauma. So you almost have to have that component that you're providing in order to survive.
I mean,
Otherwise,
you definitely attract people who want to give everything of themselves as well, you know. Denise.
So one thing we do, I work for a nonprofit that we offer a 12-week course for family members of people with a major mental illness, and it just teaches you how to communicate with people with mental illness so you don't escalate. It's trauma informed, it's evidence-based, whatever. So one of the things we do, because the staff, it's a small staff, 6 members, but we all have this common, we all have a person with borderline personality in our lives. We say 1 to 10, what's your level of stress?
Right.
You know, and that's, I mean, you sound like you do that with the group spiritual direction, but it's
I
something
should
like
do
that.
that more.
Because we all share that common thing, and then it's a way to say, okay, it's a 3 now, but some days it's an 8, and then, you know, it's just something.
Yeah, I mean, like something like that, I feel like is really helpful, because then you interact. You're
Yeah.
like more compassionate or more cautious with each other.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's really helpful.
It is like, I mean, it's everything you've said. It's just, I think, person growing pains too. It's, you know, you go through something really like, traumatic's a strong word, but when you go through life, because life will throw you major curveballs, and you have to go through this, and then you kind of go inward, and then you can expand outward.
For
So,
sure.
yeah. So.
Cool. Anything else from you guys? Well, feel free to email me. It's just caz@thesimpleWay.org. And sorry about the neighborhood, the music. Do you want to say anything else?
No, I appreciate you all the time.
Yeah, great.
Thank you very much.
so much.
We'll have a conversation about sustainability, and I'm hoping to get a good friend, Dee Dee Risher, who lives in a different community, to come and share. So, but you can our newsletter will have it, or our social medias.
All right.
Great.
Thank you.
Is it going to be around the same
but
time
keep
every
on.
month?
Yeah, we're hoping to aim for like the last week of the month, either Thursday or Friday, but yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.